This episode is brought to you by CBS All Access. If you don't already subscribe to CBS All Access, please use our affiliate link by going to talkthroughmedia.com/CBS. Using our affiliate link gives us a little credit, which helps us to keep bringing you great content. U.S. residents only. Hello, and welcome to Episode 8 of the Star Trek Lower Decks podcast. I'm Brian.
And I'm Kyle.
And tonight we will be covering Season 1, Episode 8 of Star Trek Lower Decks, titled Veritas. But before we get started, we want to mention something that we usually mention at the end of the podcast, and that's because, we're getting close to the point where Discovery is going to start, and we know some of you may not listen right to the end. So we want to mention this. If you listen to us on the Star Trek Picard cast feed and you watch Star Trek Discovery or plan to this season, you may want to subscribe to the Star Trek Discovery podcast feed instead, which also has the Picard and Lower Decks episodes. Because when Discovery returns, it will be the only Star Trek feed that we have that will have Discovery on it. So, and of course, the Talk Through Media all-inclusive feed has everything within the network. We say this at the end of the podcast every week, but we wanted to go forward with it just to catch some of you in the first minute or so. So, all right. So now we'll get started with, first of all, some additional feedback for last week's episode, Season 1, Episode 7, Much Ado About Boimler. So we'll open hailing frequencies.
Well, Ken from Chicago, and I'm so glad that he is tweeting back at us and giving some feedback because he has some good points or whatever, but it's like, so he said, it's like, if you spend 10 minutes on yeses and 20 minutes on nitpicks, would most folks think you like the episode?
and I read that and I was like, okay, yeah, you got a point.
Yeah, I totally. It's to
an extent, but I think that the points that we brought up were valid points to make, but it does kind of get detracted. It's one of those things where, I don't know, I think it's human nature sometimes. We tend to focus on the negative a lot of times, for example, like the actor who's getting stage reviews and he gets, say, 10 reviews and 9 of them, say how he deserves an award for his role and, how good he did. And one guy just hates him and gives him a really scandalous review. Well, the actor, by nature focuses on the crappy review. It just happens. Or the book author, focuses on the bad review, or the screenwriter focuses on the bad review. It happens. So
yeah,
I think we're focusing on some of the negative things because, I don't know, there's more to hook on to, I guess, but your point, Ken, is taken. That last week there was a lot of good to say, and quite honestly, there's a lot of good to say about this week's episode. I don't really have a lot of negatives.
Yeah, totally.
So,
yeah. No, and I think it's like that's a very good point. It's like, oh yeah, you spend 10 minutes on yeses, and you he's saying like 20 minutes on nitpicks, but it's like we also react off of our listeners' feedback. So yes. It's like, we could definitely be like, oh yeah. It's like, I agree. Or these are the good points of this. But I mean, it is kind of like we are, we do
hostage.
kind of, we're not in that sense, but it's like, we're reacting to our viewers, listeners,
right.
like comments. So it's like, yes, we ourselves can be like, hey, like we're like bringing all these good positive points and this and that, but we're also reacting to our listeners' feedback.
Yes.
And I think some of that too is like we've reacted to some of our listeners' feedback being like, hey, yeah, I'm like, well, I agree with that, but I'm also kind of like, hey, I kind of felt this went a better way, blah, blah, blah. So
I think it has to do with the format of our show, which has kind of evolved as Ruthie and I started this kind of format with the Walking Dead talk through. It actually changed a lot. Kyle, when you became the host of Fear the Walking Dead talk through, we made quite a few changes that one season, if you remember. And all of those changes have stuck, so we changed the order around. We made it so it was feedback first. That all came with Kyle. So but a lot of it is the way that we've structured it. So we give the feedback, or give the yeses and nos that the listeners come up with first, and then we react to them so that we don't duplicate, right? Yeah. So anyway, I think a lot of it comes out of that. But and then unfortunately, a lot of times when the listeners maybe miss stuff, then we, especially if there's certain parts of the episode that we have nitpicks over, we'll spend time and point them out. And I've done it, you've done it, particularly Fear.
Yes, Fear.
Gasoline batteries.
Yes.
Anyway, the point being that I think a lot of it comes out of the format and not wanting to repeat ourselves, but yet try to give the listeners the chance to come up with these things first. So
yes.
Anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
Well, he goes on to say the alien maybe wasn't able to absorb the phaser blast that quickly. I don't know. Brian might like a nice juicy steak, but hit him on the face with one and he'd be stunned temporarily.
That was
so
funny.
This was like, this is the episode, probably I don't know, like 2 episodes ago when they had the energy beam, and I brought up saying it's like, okay, why was she able to use the phaser? And it was absorbing electricity, which I thought was interesting. It's like they specifically said electricity, which in the 24th century, 3rd century, it's like, how is that like different than anything else?
Yeah, it was noticeable.
Yeah.
And you brought it up, and after you brought it up, I had to say, I can't disagree with you there.
But if I'm hitting you with a steak, I'm going to take it back and then cook it up, because I'm not going to let a steak go away.
No, especially if it's a nice, porterhouse or ribeye. That stuff's not going to go to waste.
Nope. I'll barbecue that. And then he said, note, there was a rhetorical example only. Please do not hit Brian in the face with the steak or meat or food in general. Yes, because I would keep that steak and would barbecue it for myself. And then he goes on, he says, yes, the Division 14 ship does not have a standard Starfleet design. And I think we kind of mentioned that, or yes. Maybe a listener did, but
no, I believe I mentioned it, and I think a listener mentioned it too.
Yeah.
So
because it was not any kind of design that was at least specifically like, oh, this is like something we've seen before. Because I think this episode we saw something we specifically know, but that's a good point. Mariner's not a screw up. She's resisting promotions like Wrecker did. Yes, she has a traumatic experience in her past. She has said as much in the pilot when she took off her clothes. She has seen things. I can't disagree with that.
Right.
How could Starfleet officer know what a trash bag smells like? If only they had a device that could simulate or replicate 20th century trash bags, but what could it be? By the way, I think Kyle is right. I think the secret about why Mariner is something they are building to for the season finale.
Your point about the trash bags in the holodeck is well taken. Hadn't thought of that. Don't know why I didn't think of that, but you did. So kudos.
Yeah. And I agree. And I don't know. I'm very curious what Ken from Chicago thought about this episode, because it was, I mean, I do agree, or I'm glad that he agrees with me. It's like, I feel like we're seeing something that this is kind of building to the end, but we're getting close to the end. So it's kind of like, okay, well, let's see. But this episode was unlike any of the episodes. So, I mean, we'll go into that. So,
yes. And we got one more bit of feedback from fellow Brian from Hawaii. He says, I agree it wasn't the strongest episode, but it was an improvement over the low point of last week's episode with Badgie. I enjoyed the Ready Room interviews more this week than the actual episode. I'm a little confused about that. Maybe because the Ready Room interviews were for episode 6, so maybe you saw them and thought that they were for episode 7. I don't think there was anything really too much in the episode that made you think it was for episode 6, although I think there was a preview for episode 7. But anyway, but yeah, there's no Ready Room episodes until the finale on October 8th. So just so we know. Okay, so let's move on to this episode. Season 1, episode 8, titled Veritas, written by Garrick Bernard, not to be confused with Garrick. Directed by Kim Arndt, Arndt, who has also directed season 1, episodes 2 and 5. And the description from CBS.com is as follows. Mariner, Boimler, Tendi, and Rutherford are caught off guard when aliens force them to testify about a series of seemingly unrelated events. That is TVPG with language and violence with a star date. Now, there were 2 star dates that were mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The first one that we're given, and I have it on here, is 57818.4, or as he said it, 57818.4.
Yep.
Picked up on that. And then there was a second date, which I'll mention simply because the date that it was given was actually before the other one. And I believe it was 57791.1, and I'm just confirming that.
Yeah, that's what it was. That's what I wrote down. It's 5779.
57791.1. Okay.
No, 5791.1.
Yes. The air date of September 23rd, 2020. Of course, it aired September 24th, but on Pacific time, it appeared at 11:08. So, and I know it was 11:08 because I kept refreshing the screen. I was like, what the heck? You're late. So, because usually it's around 2:06, but anyway, I found it at 2:08. It had a runtime of 25 minutes and 27 seconds. All right, Kyle, what did you think of Veritas?
Well, I just have to say that I think my ratings, I'm gonna have to say, just are based on like my emotions.
Okay.
Because like I actually kind of went back and actually started looking at some of my old ratings from like Fear back in season 3.
Oh my goodness,
like,
you went back that far.
Yeah, or no, it's like I kind of like was checking things, and then I kind of looked at like just past stuff because I'm like, I have all that stuff on here on my computer, and I was kind of like, okay, but I was like, you know what, screw it, I don't care. Like, I'm not trying to be like this barometer. I'm just like, this is how I feel, and like this is what it is. So I'm giving this episode basically the highest rating they can give. And I'm going to give it a 10 updating Klingon fonts. What? Why do I need that out of 10?
That was hysterical. That was hysterical.
I just have to say the whole episode that just encompasses that. So I'm giving it my highest rating.
I am not going to give it as high of a rating, but I'm not sure why. If I have to justify why are you not giving it a 10? I don't know. Because it was definitely the best of the season by far. I guess I only have one negative to say about it. And anyway, maybe two. Okay, but they're pretty minor. So I'm going to give this one a 9.5 sensitive corneas. All right. I don't know.
Hey.
I had another idea, but
it's all good.
All right. So let's move on to listener ratings.
All right. Our first comes from Edwin from Arizona, and he gives it an 8.5 cat hairs.
LT from NC says, I'm giving Veritas a 9.2 out of 10. Send them a message. And that's kind of what I was thinking to go with, but LT went with that. So it's like, okay, what do I come up with now?
And Wes from Minnesota gave it an easily my favorite of the season. I laughed throughout. 9.8 horns of candor out of 10.
Yep.
Almost went with that, Wes. Just
yeah,
it's gonna be a good one.
Yeah, I guess you could also go with 9.5. What would it be?
But what scene?
It was
Gorn.
It was the one on the bridge. It's like Boimler. Okay.
The 88. Did you notice that his voice cracked?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So now it's time for yeses.
Yes. All right. Our first one comes from Edwin from Arizona, and he said the episode had a nice pace. It was fast and had a lot of action in it. The TNG references were really good. Completely agree with you. I thought it wasn't only TNG, but all the references I think were spot on this episode.
Yeah. Wes from Minnesota said the entire episode was really funny, but I really want to give a special shout out to John Delancey and Kurtwood Smith. Their performances were funny. Second, Mariner firing the Cerritos' phasers after misinterpreting the orders from Captain Freeman. Yeah, it was that was funny. And I was just thinking about Boimler every time he's trying to give a recommendation, he either sounds like he's kissing ass or he's very indecisive. It's really funny. I've said this at least half a dozen times now, how the perfect commanding officer would be a combination of Mariner and Boimler. And in the case of Mariner, she takes charge, but obviously she goes off half-cocked and fires phasers at them. But Boimler can't make a decision to save himself and, acts like a doofus as a result. 88?
So, yeah, I know. It was,
and then 84? Are you crazy?
Yeah.
And then the crazy Ivan part.
Oh gosh, I laughed so hard from that. That was so hilarious. Well, no, that's what's so fun about this show is the fact that it's like we've never seen that on the regular all of a Star Trek,
right?
It's no one ever is hey, oh, it's send them a message, and she's like, okay. Yes, I thought about.
Well, the thing is, though, sometimes send them a message means fire phasers, right? I mean,
right.
We've seen that before. So
right, but that's what I thought was funny because then the captain was just like, "Oh no, I wanted to invite them for dinner," and it was just like, "Yes," because that's what they always do. They're like, "Oh, come over." to our ship and we will have a dinner and this and that. I thought that was just hilarious.
Well, the funny thing with send them a message, when she said send them a message, that's what I thought she meant. I thought she meant fire phasers like over the port bow or whatever. That's what I thought. But obviously, that's not what she meant. I agree with you, Wes. There was a lot really good about this episode. And continuing on with that, we have LT from NC, who has several things he brought up. Boimler asking for context in the cold open after the prison/dungeon conversation with Rutherford. The black bars over the eyes of the covert ops crew during Tendy's testimony. It made me laugh. Yes, it made me laugh too, as well as this. These bleeps that they did.
Yeah.
The update blackouts from Rutherford's implant update. Yes, that was really funny. And like it's like I felt bad for the guy.
I know, totally. He was like, he just like, oh, I'm restarting. Every time he's like, what the heck is going on?
And the one that I was really gonna give my rating on, and Kyle knows this because I mentioned it when we were, trying to do the docs. They're scanning. That was so funny, especially on repeated watches. Like, I just, every time Tendy tries to say, they're scanning. It's like, oh, wait, they're not scanning. They're scanning.
And I love the fact that she's just like, yeah, okay, fine. I give up.
Yeah.
I'm done. Like, we've had those experiences before. It's just like, oh, okay, fine. I'm never going to get a word in edgewise. Done.
Yeah.
Oh, that's too funny.
Ransom's alien dates, which sounds like a series of its own. And
yeah,
of course, Mariner with her "Shut up, Billups," and "Get out of here, Q." Yeah, and she had a couple other, like she called Captain Freeman Captain Clarity. Which again, I don't think the rest of the crew know that she is the daughter of Captain Freeman.
Yeah.
All right, so that's it for our listener guesses. So, Kyle, what do you have for yeses?
I mean, I don't know. This is kind of like I had a hard time being like, where do I put all this stuff? Because it was just like I enjoyed this episode like way pretty much from the whole entire season. And I just, it's like there was just like the little spots. It was like, okay, so Boimler on the bridge and doing his whole like Mariner was telling us like, I don't know, you just tell the captain what she wants. She knows what she's going to do. And he's like, oh, I'm going to, so just wing it. And it was just a fun interaction between them. And he's just like, oh yeah, I'll do maneuver 88.
Yeah.
And his voice cracked. So, I mean, that was just so much fun. Like that whole scene and that interaction. And then like Rutherford's story with his he's like, they're like forcing him to do the update because he's like got this, cybernetic, like apparently he's basically half Borg or something. Like this thing controls him. And, it was just the whole rebooting, like the whole time he was like, no, I do this when I'm sleeping. And like he didn't really get into like why, and then we see why. It's just like, oh, he's just like rebooting, and like he showing up in like all different situations while trying to do some mission. And the Gorn wedding, like that, I don't know. It was just like that's kind of like that one little like Gorn. I mean, you can probably fill in this maybe better than I can, but I know it's like we've only seen Gorn maybe once, twice. I don't know. Like it's. That races we've seen like once in like whatever that I remember.
Arena was the big appearance, and they've been shown, but just like background stuff.
Right.
Like,
but not like any.
What's his name? Captain Lorca had a Gorn skull in Discovery that in his like little trophy case of oddities.
Yeah.
But and there have been, I think, little other mentions of Gorn. And I
Yeah.
know the Discovery writers team wanted to desperately put in Gorn, and they were, trying to justify it. They couldn't justify it. But
I just, well, it's like I think most of us Trekkies, like at least we have any kind of like some recollection with just even Gorn or just like whatever, and it was just like,
yeah, Gorn wedding though, that was really something.
Right, and it was, I laughed out loud when I saw that. I was like, this was the last thing that in his story, and it was like that's what it was, and then he like went to sleep and or like like rebooted or whatever, and he thought he was going to be out of it, and he's like, oh gosh, it's like they're still biting him out. Oh gosh, I don't know. It was a lot of fun. And then the last, I mean, like Tendi. It was just like there was just so much going on with like her, and I'm like,
yeah. The thing I'm not really sure about is, was she supposed to be the cleaner, or was that just a mistake?
And like a mistake? No, that's what I thought too. Yeah. And it was just like she was on conference duty, so she's cleaning the cat hair off the conference chairs,
right?
Which would seem like that's a total lower deck thing to do, and then she somehow got sucked into this whole covert operation, and they were just like, hey, you're going to be the cleaner, and then she's like, okay, fine, whatever. And then the whole part of like her to be like, well, I don't know what this means, but I'm like, I want to, oh no, we're scanning. Oh, we're being scanned. Her whole arc, like I just laughed out loud. Yeah. I loved it. I thought it was hilarious. And I thought it was so much fun. And then the whole, like her doing the Kung Fu and like, beating all, like, cause she's like, I don't know what am I supposed to do? And then she's like, okay, cool. I'm being Kung Fu. But then whenever Clar, which was the alien that was basically we thought was doing like the putting them on trial,
yes,
was just like, you didn't do Kung Fu. But her whole response is like, oh yes, you're right, I didn't do Kung Fu. And then she winked like, like, yeah, I'm still in classified mode.
Yeah,
I thought was like brilliant. I don't know, I loved it. That's I'm going to leave it at that. I'm like, I'm more happy about this episode since the start of all this. This was probably the best episode we've seen this season.
Yeah, it was definitely the best episode we've seen. Like the ending was very unexpected. I didn't think I had no idea that it was a party. I mean, I thought that it was a trial. Just like, the lower decks people did. And I didn't really put anything for yeses, but only because I didn't have time. I think some of it has been mentioned. You mentioned like the Rutherford story. I thought the Rutherford story was fantastic. And like I felt bad for the guy that he was missing out of, all the excitement, and B, that every time he has to upgrade his cybernetic implant or cyborg implant, that he like misses time. I mean, that's terrible. I thought that bridge thing was also great. I thought it was funny that Rutherford tuned the speakers of that shuttle bay, and, that was
hilarious.
Yeah, so in other words, tune them right off. So probably overloaded them or something, and blew out the speakers, which makes you wonder, like, okay, they still have speakers in the 24th century. But anyway, I mean, if I get real nitpicky on that kind of stuff, it's just gonna take it away. Kurtwood Smith, who once played the president of the Federation and in Star Trek VI, and what was his name? Anorax, I think. So that was his name. In the Year of Hell.
Yeah.
He was the bad guy in the 2-part Year of Hell episode of Voyager.
Oh yeah.
Yes, and quite awesome in that role. And of course, you may know him from such things as Clarence Boddicker in the first RoboCop movie. He was great in that. And of course, he played the dad in My 70s Show. Pretty well-known actor, and obviously got some comedic chops. So he was great in this. Great performances, of course. Q, which we were kind of warned about on Star Trek Day, that Q was going to be back sometime this season, and we get this episode, and I got a kick out of when Mariner says, go bug Picard, and he's like, oh, we just recites Shakespeare, and he's
drinks wine.
Yeah,
it's like
yeah. Oh yes, another thing when Mariner says, there's nothing to do on Earth but drink wine and hang out in vineyards and soul food restaurants. I thought that was funny.
Yeah, those are all just like total references to everything we've always seen on Star Trek.
Another really funny reference that I thought was just so weird was the fan dance when Rutherford had to do the fan dance that Uhura did in Star Trek V.
Yeah.
that was really funny.
Yeah.
And there's some other things that I can bring up as really good points in the references, but I won't particularly go into that. I did think that Dr. Tana, the couple of things that she had in the episode were really funny as well. That whole shaving down thing. I was thinking,
I know.
What? And then I was thinking, okay, we had one of our cats, Loverboy, we used to have to shave down his private parts because he would get mats down there. And he'd get, poop stuck in his fur. So I'm thinking that's what it was.
Yeah, I know. But they all laughed.
Oh yeah,
like ha ha ha. It's like I just kind of was like I don't know what that. I just assumed it was something down there with the lady parts.
I have a feeling that I'm going to come up with some other things to highlight as my favorites, and I suck for not having good notes this week, but I can at least remember what I've seen because I've seen it enough times. But anyway, let's move on to our no's.
No! All right, our first no comes from Edwin from Arizona. He said no to the shouting aliens. They reuse the same sound in other episodes. And I kind of not sure which aliens, I wasn't sure what he was referring to, but
yeah, I don't know.
But I mean, it's kind of like I obviously could see them they reusing sounds. So it's like if you caught that, I'm gonna have to go back and try to check for it. But I'm like, if you caught that, then that's good.
Yeah.
Good deal. Then Wes from Minnesota, he said the bridge crew on the planet hardly did anything, which is okay. This was an episode strictly for the lower decks. Also, Captain Freeman saying they'll be more open with the crew about what they're doing, and things are classified for a reason. Yeah. From the start, I thought it was okay, I saw the semblance of we've seen these things, the whole court, where everybody's in this whole arena and they come up or whatever. It's that. I mean, it was obviously a very play on of Star Trek IV, the movie.
Yeah.
So it's we saw that whole kind of setup of where there's just this, tiered people, everybody, whatever, this and that. So I'm I got that from the beginning. That I was oh, obviously this is a play on that. It was kind of the bridge crew being up in this these lights. I thought the thing that kind of cued it off was the fact that Carl was saying hey, you are witnesses to these things, but it's oh, tell me about these wonderful things that they did. And it was that made no sense. I was kind of okay, I don't know what's going on, but he just said if you're on trial, it's you would never say it's oh, but describe the wonderful things that they did. And I was okay,
right.
I'm whatever that means, let's just go with it. And so I don't know. I just I didn't really take that as being like a bad thing. It was just kind of like that was the cue of like, oh, this doesn't really seem to kind of like fit to being what I expected from the initial beginning of just what I was seeing.
We have one more, and that is from LT from NC. He says, I liked seeing Q, but the Q sequences were just a little too silly. I guess they were supposed to be. It was a little much, in my opinion. Okay. I think that they were supposed to be silly. And there's a lot, silly things about Q. For example, who can forget?
Au contraire, mon capitaine! He's back!
Which is really funny. Now, when I hear that, I also think of Breaking Bad.
Oh God! Yeah,
which John Delancey was in, strangely enough. But I think that there is a lot of silly when it comes to the character of Q, and like the strange puzzle thing. I mean, I really don't know what the point of that was. Like, so we have chess pieces and we have football goalposts, but then we have soccer ball. So I don't.
I think to me it was just like that's basically like that's what summed up this episode was just the fact that it's like, okay, Boimler is just saying, hey, no, it's like they don't even know what they're doing. It's like they don't know what's the most like perfect example of just random chaos or just makes no sense or whatever. It's Q.
Right.
It's like,
right. Yeah.
I just like, and for him to sit there and say like, oh, they don't even know what they're doing, half the time. It's like, trying to make this whole like argument about like, oh yeah, start like we're all in this together and like doing whatever. But it was just to bring Q in there, and then Q was just like, yes, Q will be like, hey, I want to know what like the human race like, what's the puzzle? It's like I want the human race to like, like defend themselves or whatever, and I'm going to do like a freaking Alice in Wonderland thing. It's like that's basically what I got from it. So I don't know. I thought the whole Q injection of this made so much sense. It was a reference that most of us Trekkies, even in probably side passing Trekkies, have seen an episode with Q. And I just thought it's like if you're going to put him in here, it was like this was the perfect episode to do it. Yeah. So but thank you, LT. It's like I'm not trying to like fight with you or whatever. I thought Q being in this episode was perfect.
So as far as you for no's?
Oh no, I had none. I loved the episode. Give it a 10.
Well, I had a couple little things, just not much, but these aren't really nitpicks, but this was something I definitely noticed. The Vulcan security guard, he did not seem very Vulcan to me. So, I mean, was he not Vulcan? I mean, he had Vulcan eyebrows, it looked like. So that one to me kind of missed pretty big because he did not seem like a logical Vulcan to me. He sounded like a human.
Mm-hmm.
Also, there was a lot of bleeps in this episode, which I'm not trying to be prudish, but I don't think it needed to have that many. So I would have maybe cut that down a half. Of course, the ones during the Tendi section, a lot of them were, of course, beeps for Nutrizone stuff. And that's why we also have this week. But yeah, I think they could have done with a little less. And I was actually surprised that something got, as many had as many bleeps and it was still PG. So probably because I don't know, there wasn't anything really gory. It did mention violence, but I guess nothing overtly violent. But on the whole, those two minor things, I think the episode was pretty great, and I thought definitely deserved a 9.5 out of 10, and that's why I gave it that score. So, okay, so that's it for our no's. So let's move on to our not good enoughs.
Not good enough, damn it! Not good enough!
Wes from Minnesota, he says, Rutherford and his updating of his cybernetic implant. I would have loved to have seen more of that.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it had, I think it had enough instances of it, so I don't know how you could have gotten more, but
no, I think maybe it's like more of like that, like in his character, and we see more, because it was like this is the only time we've seen his implant, and then like how it works,
yeah,
and then like there obviously is like some drawback to it, and this is one of my favorite. Like, I mean, I don't know, it's like all the little spots that they like, all our crew members, like their spots, like this is some really, really fun stories, each of their little things. And Rutherford's was hilarious. It's just like, oh, no, I don't want to do that. I do that when I'm asleep. And then it's like, we see the whole bad outcome of that. So I would like to see more, maybe just in like his character development later. Or like, we now know this is like a flaw. And when does
it seems like there's a lot of flaws with his implant. It's very kind of quirky.
Yeah, it's like him twisting the what was it, like he was working on, is like, oh, twist them like the plasma conduits or whatever. It's like, oh, if they stay in the same place for too long, it's like they overheat. It's like, well, okay, if he doesn't have like, you know, like a 7 of 9, kind of like, I need to have my downtime so that my brain doesn't overload.
Yeah,
I don't know, you know, something like that. I don't know.
You have not good enough, so go ahead.
All right, yeah. So this was kind of tough for me. So it's kind of like, it's like I went over and over again, like what might not be good enough with this episode, but I think that might not good enough is actually going to be with the whole season so far. Because I think this episode felt so different. It's like I felt like this was the Lower Decks that we should have seen from the very start. You know, it's like, because I know obviously we've been doing this for, this is episode 8. So we've done eight episodes of this. And I remember my first instinct, or my first reaction to season 1 was just like, oh, this is just crap. And I don't even want to like deal with this. So like, this is horrible. I don't really like it. And I'm like, I felt like it's like this episode, I laughed out loud more than I actually ever. I've never laughed out loud with the rest of the episodes. And I just thought all the references were just complete. Well, ever in this series, but I'm just like, I was laughing out loud, and I remember like messaging you, just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, and I'm like, I'm rewatching it right now, like without even like trying to do notes or like do anything. I'm just like, I'm just gonna watch it just to watch it again, because I'm like, I just want to enjoy it, and I just thought all the references were just fine. If I'm going to go all out there, it's like, I thought the references this time were like completely on spot. Like they made sense. It made me laugh. It made me feel like, oh gosh, you know, it's like I had a connection. I actually was like, my husband, who is like not a fan of the show and not really much of a Trekkie, but I was like turning to him just like, I think you need to watch this, because I'm like, you know enough, but I'm like, this was like, you would get this, and this would make, like, I don't know. I thought this was probably the episode that should have been the very first one that we saw, because it made so much sense, and it would have been a very good hook to people. I don't know. This should have been the pilot. And I've seen that online and all this stuff. So I'm not trying to say it's like, oh, I'm just taking from something else, but it's like, I've never laughed out loud as much as I have in this show until now. And I thought it was just amazing. I enjoyed it. It was so entertaining. Q fit in perfectly. It didn't feel like it was like some kind of like, oh, they're just throwing it in there just to like make it happen. It made sense. It was hilarious. There's a Picard jokes. It was like, I'm very impressed. This was a very, very good episode. So
Yeah.
I was,
Yeah. I mean, I guess my not good enough would be we didn't see Boimler testify. He was just there kind of to guide, like he kind of maneuvered the plot a little bit in a couple of places like Mariner and I guess Tendi when they kind of got in trouble or, when all three of them were in trouble, but he never got to testify. So I would have liked to have seen if there was anything specific to him, but we didn't get that. But maybe there really wasn't anything.
Yeah, no, but he was the one that ended up basically finishing and doing the mic drop.
Right, I know. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's like that's kind of like he everybody else went ahead of him.
Right.
And then so he was the one that was
arguments.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
He was the closer. So it's another show, but that's on AMC or on TBS.
ENT. Yeah. All right, so that's it for our not good enoughs. Now we're going to move on to our listener feedback section. So we're going to open hailing frequencies. And our first voicemail, we have 2 this week, is from Jeff, X-Force 11.
Hello, Star Trek fans. This is Jeff X-Force 11 leaving my feedback for STLD Veritas. Oh my gosh, I am still laughing after this episode. What a cool episode. You get Q in this episode. You get to see the Lower Decks crew standing up for themselves. You get to see Tendi being a badass and kicking butt and so much more. I absolutely love this episode. It was probably my favorite one of the season so far. All right, those are my thoughts. X-Force 11 is out.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff, X-Force 11, for your voicemail. And I've got to say, I totally agree with you. 100%. We've already said it. I really enjoyed this one, as did Kyle. Definitely the best of the season so far. Was a laugh a minute, and it was one of those ones where you had to pay attention, but at the same time, there was a lot that you wanted to pay attention to. It's like,
yeah.
So I thought it was great.
I was just listening to Jeff's, like, just his voice kind of made me feel like that's exactly how I felt too. I was just like, oh my goodness, this was so much fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it kind of made you.
Thank you, Jeff.
It made you giddy. And you were saying earlier that this was a lot of what you had hoped.
Yeah.
The season, the show would be. And I don't know if I 100% agree with that sentiment, just because I think you had to build to a point for an episode like this to hit. And I'll give you an example. The episode from season 1 of Discovery, Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad. I think if that had been the first episode, it wouldn't have worked. But as the 7th episode of season 1, after it established the characters, it totally worked. And, that's still one of my favorites of the series. But I think if it had been in the first episode or 2, I don't think it would have worked because you wouldn't know the characters.
Well, right. And then that's a very good point. But it's just like, who is this episode like, or who is this like series for? Is it for new people or is it for Trekkies? And I'm thinking that it's like, if it's for new people, well, then you can kind of go like, actually, like, bring up my neighbor. I would love to talk to my neighbors who just found out that I podcast about Lower Decks, and my husband was just like, oh yeah, he's got to go do he's podcasting for Star Trek, like Lower Decks. And they were like, oh my gosh, we love Lower Decks. But I'm like, I've never talked to, I don't know what they what's their background and what do they have. And it's just like, I just know for a Trekkie like me, it was just like, this is a whole new experience.
Yes.
And I think that it's like, I would have appreciated this episode from the beginning more than what I did from the episode we got for the pilot. And that's a very, very good question and debate to have. That's like, I think that's where it's at. It's like, what are they going for? And then it's like, they're trying to appease everyone or also bring in new people in. And I don't know. This
Do you think that this episode doesn't appeal to new people?
I think it appeals more to us diehard Trekkies completely, because I think I was like, because new people would not understand Q. They would not understand what Q is.
That's
and
true.
like why he fits and like what that even means.
Right.
It's almost kind of like that's an inside joke. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, what's Q? And
I would
like,
agree.
that would have.
Yeah, I would agree, except I would say that that Q wasn't the major source of this show. I think he was only one
but
element of it.
right. And then there's the argument to saying, well, then that's why this came in at this point in the episode. It was or this season. It's because you want to bring in like new people and not overload them with all this like Trek, like, like secondhand knowledge or like, like inside jokes and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And then build into being like, okay, now here's like where the rest of us are like, oh yeah, this is like totally amazing. And like, oh, that makes sense. So I don't know that, it depends on like who are they trying to direct the audience to? They're trying.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to,
no, I was just basically saying it's like, it's like, was like trying to bring in new people and then kind of then for the rest of us being like, hey, it's like, here's your little like, oh, here's your episode. Or was it just about us to begin with? And it's like, I don't know. I just, this episode felt so much different than the rest of them. So I'm like, I don't know. It's,
this is a good time to bring this up.
Stability loss was due to an impact by a subspace interface pocket.
Yes.
That is what you call a non sequitur. But anyway, my point that I want to make is that I think this show is for both the hardcore Trekkie or Trekker that, loves Star Trek, yet isn't too like hung up on the format. Because I mean, there are some people that are big Star Trek fans, but they just can't get past the idea that, some of these officers aren't acting like exemplary officers, or the starship is not the best or whatever. They can't get past that. Or, they want the story to like mean something. But my take on it is the story didn't always mean something. That's kind of revisionist history. Yes, there's City on the Edge of Forever, but there's also Spock's brain. So, let's not forget Spock's brain.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So anyway, my point is I think that this is for the hardcore Star Trek fans that are willing to give a new format a try, or, are into things like Rick and Morty and Futurama and Family Guy and the Orville, that'll like give, either like comedic Star Trek or animation. And our own Ruthie, she won't give this a try. I don't know if she's watched it or not. We'll find out on the Patreon this week. But I think it's also for the fans of things like Family Guy, things like the Orville, things like Futurama, The Simpsons, and things like that like adult animation and are Star Trek fans, but they're small F fans. They're not, they're more casual fans that, don't get hung up on these things, may not get all the references. They may understand who Q is, but they won't get the Gorn wedding, or they won't get, certain things that the hardcore, the podcast listener may get. So or the podcast host may get. So I think it's both. So
Yeah.
All right. So let's move on. We've got a second voicemail, and it's from our good friend Fred from the Netherlands.
Hello, Brian and Kyle. This is Fred from the Netherlands with some feedback for Star Trek Lower Decks Season 1, Episode 8. From the beginning, I thought this must be a dream or a simulation or something like that. Well, actually, it was a party, but it took me a little bit too long to find out what it really was. In the concept, it was okay, but just took a little too long. And what also took too long is the appearance of Q. Well, of course, we didn't know he would appear in this episode, but then when he finally did, I thought, okay, they could have shown him earlier and he could have had a bigger role. But perhaps he will come back in the next few episodes. And it was, of course, nice to hear John Delancey's Q's actor, his voice. I think he has the record of most crossovers between the different Star Trek series, from Voyager to Deep Space Nine to The Next Generation, and now Lower Decks. The opening scene, of course, reminded us from the trial that Kirk and McCoy got when they got convicted to Rura Penthe, though I was thinking it was something like that. I thought Tandy telling the story but not disclosing everything with the black boxes in front of their heads was quite funny. Of course, in medicine, we use that often when we do presentations and we don't want to show the identity of a patient. And that it at the end was a party, I found a little bit far-fetched, actually. Okay, that was all for now. Greetings, all the best, Fred from the Netherlands.
Well, thank you so much, Fred, for your voicemail. And again, good to hear from you from the Netherlands. So I only got to listen to this one as we were playing it, but I did take notes. So I guess you didn't like it as much as the rest of us did, from what I'm gathering there. You said too long to tell us what it was about. To an extent, I can understand that. Although I think for me, it really worked with that long, like, 'cause if they had given the information that it wasn't a trial, I think it wouldn't have worked. By the way, I thought it was really funny that one guy that it seems like is a judge, he's just the guy waiting.
Yes, he's like, I'm just waiting for so I can set up the party for my daughter who's 100, and then Tindy's all like, oh. I didn't really feel a problem with the flow of this at all. I thought it was actually I actually started as at the beginning when they were thrown into the dungeon, and then they went up and got shoved up into basically the where they're going to testify or whatever, witnesses. And I kind of started oh gosh, this is a Hunger Games episode. It's it's that was very similar. It's they're going to go up and do some death, and it's oh no, it's in a court. And then we saw the semblance of yes, what we've seen in Star Trek Undiscovered Country, the movie, that it's that's the same Kirk and Spock, the setup that we've seen before. So I kind of was that cued me off as oh, this is kind of this is what this is about. It's a trial, which it wasn't, but we find that out later. And I thought the Q part though, I don't want to see Q again in the rest of the season, because I think just having him here and doing what he did in this episode was just the amount. Because I'm Q can be Q is one of those things where it's a
sprinkle of Q,
right.
You sprinkle Q in at the right time, and he's great. You have too much Q, and it's like having too much hot sauce or too much cilantro.
Don't burn our mouths. So just this was the right sprinkling of Q for this series, which is obviously not Star Trek, but it's Star Trek in a different form. This was the perfect, I thought, time to bring him in. And then Mariner was just at the end was we don't have time for you. Just go away. go away. And then, you know, there was a whole exchange. I guess this is the thing I was like trying to bring up and like trying to write my notes, but he says something about, or he like said something in French, and then like,
S'il vous plaît.
Mariner was like, yeah, and he's like, she was like, I'm not French. It's like, go to talk to Picard. He's like, oh no, Picard only likes to talk to Shakespeare and drink wine. You know, it's like, that was the end of the episode, and that was just perfect and hilarious and like whatever. So I don't know. It's like, I don't want to see Q again.
Yeah.
Like this was just the right time to see him.
I agree. I agree with you. S'il vous plaît in English means please. So just, you know, and I'm French Canadian, so I'd better get that correct. Yes. I agree with you, Kyle. I think that too much of Q is a bad thing. Hot sauce or cilantro or garlic or onions. I'm reminded of the salad, the Greek salad that we got earlier this week, where my wife loves onions normally, and these had too many onions, and it just overpowered everything. And my wife did nothing but complain about it, even though the fact that she loves onions. So too many onions is a bad thing, and too much of Q is a bad thing. So
yes.
So I wouldn't mind seeing him again in the series, and maybe next time he has a bigger role, but I certainly don't want to see him in the next 2 episodes.
Yeah.
But moving on, could have shown Q earlier. Not just, you know, more of Q, but seen him earlier. Again, I don't think it would have been a good thing for that as well. Too long to tell us what it was all about. I mean, yes, but structurally it wouldn't have been great. You brought up something that I was going to bring up in the references section, and that is Repente. It certainly did remind me of Star Trek VI and the trial that Kirk and McCoy have on Repente, or at least that's where they get sentenced to is the mining colony or whatever. And you said that the whole trial to party was far-fetched. I would agree to an extent. I kind of went like, huh? But I don't know. I kind of enjoyed it for its comedic part. Like I said, the guy that was just, you know, there because he was waiting on the party, and then, you know, he gets the rug pulled from under him because the next family has to come in for their etching or something.
Yeah.
And I wondered, you know, what was the etching exactly? What were they etching? So maybe that was etching in the stone. I don't know, but that stone that he mentions in the flashback.
Yeah, like the history stone or whatever they talked about. But
yeah.
Yes, I kind of agree. It was like that kind of was far-fetched. But I think just the whole over arc of the whole like episode, it was just like, I don't know. To me, it played off as being like, oh, something ridiculous is going on. And I'm like, and I wasn't like understanding it. And I was like, I remember at the beginning, he was saying like, oh, it's like, well, you tell me about the wonderful things that your officers, like senior officers are doing. And I was like, why is he calling it like the wonderful things? You know, it's like, this was like a trial. And so it's kind of like, I kind of got that it was like, oh, something's going on that I don't understand, like where they're going with this. And yeah, I guess in the end, it was like, okay, this is kind of like that's where it's all, like a little on the nose. Like, you know, it's like, oh, this is just, obviously, okay, it was a birthday party. Ha, 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 you know, like whatever. But I also still think that it was hilarious, the fact that Mariner was like, but that guy, he's like scowling at me. You know, it's like, he's like looking at us as like this horrible thing. And it's like, who is he? It's like, oh, I don't know who he is. And then it's like, the guy was like,
yeah,
oh no, it's like, I'm just here waiting for my daughter. And then we kind of got the whole big picture at that point. And then it was like, oh, Like, yeah, he's just waiting because this is obviously like the party central that it's like everybody's just like sharing. It's like, and he only had 22 minutes to do this. So this whole episode went through 22 minutes of the time that he bought. And so I thought, yes, it probably could have been done a little better or like something like that. But it was just like, in the end, it's like, it didn't bother me so much. It was like, oh, okay, yes, obvious. Okay, this is just a party. And then there was like kind of like the little side notes. But I think the main part of it, though, was just Boimler, Mariner, Rutherford, and Tendi and what they did and like how they reacted and like telling their stories and stuff like that was like really awesome. And then they kind of like, okay, we got to just wrap this up at the end. And it's like, okay, that's then this is the other part of the story. So it's like, yes, it could have been done better. Far-fetched, yes. I think it served its purpose and still made a very, very good episode. So I'm like, I agree with you, Fred. It's like far-fetched, yes, but I think in this show that we've seen a lot of stuff being always far-fetched. The first episode was about zombies.
Yeah. I mean, it's animation. It's not going to be grounded in realism, comedy. It's got some similarities to The Simpsons. And you're not going to think that The Simpsons is going to, be a reality-based comedic series. It's going to be something that you have preposterous things in. And this, there's going to be some things that stretch things as we've seen. So anyway, thank you for your voicemail. That's it for voicemails. We have one more bit of feedback from LT from NC.
Yeah, so LT from NC, he just said, just as an overall note, Lower Decks has gotten better as the season's gone on, and I think this is close to being my favorite episode.
Yep. I agree.
Totally right there with you,
Yep.
LT.
Mm-hmm. All right, so now we're going to go into our Spot the References section. And the funny thing with this one is that in the past, I have complained about how many references there have been. And yet, this one probably had more references than any other episode, yet I loved it.
Yes.
So, I guess it's how it's done. It makes all the difference. But okay. Roga Danar, and that was mentioned very early on in the episode. Roga Danar, he was the character played in the third season TNG episode The Hunted, played by Jeff McCarthy, who also played the chief medical officer of Voyager before he was killed, and then was, of course, replaced by the emergency medical hologram. I guess it's, a matter of opinion, but I didn't really think he had nice hair, though. Now, the nice hair guy was the guy right after that episode for two very similar episodes where it was kind of like this terrorist kind of organization with this planet, which is like affiliated with the Federation, but not part of the Federation or applying for the Federation, whatever it was. And so that character with the really nice hair was Chiral Finn, not Finn from Star Wars, but yeah, but Finn, and that episode was called The High Ground, and that person, and if you recall, this is the guy who drew a picture of Crusher in that episode, and they had this weird like transporter thing that like damaged their tissue or something like that, and his name was Richard Cox, that played Chiral Finn. But I thought he was the guy that had the really nice hair, but it was the episode right after. Of course, we have references to Khan, and I think he was mentioned more than once in the episode, but specifically, first he's mentioned as a space seed, which has to do with the title Space Seed from the first season of TOS. And then he's also, Tendi mentions his, big chest. And of course, that's a reference to Wrath of Khan, where they had this like prosthetic chest on Ricardo Montalban. to make him look, very muscular, but he didn't have that in
Well,
life.
you're right, but they also said it's like I guess there was like reports or something. It was like, oh no. Even the producer was like, oh no, that's his real chest.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm skipping the ones we've already talked about. We see in a couple of references the neutral zone map that looks very similar to the one that we see in the first season episode of TOS during A Balance of Terror, the TOS episode that introduces the Romulans, which is fantastic. One of the best episodes of TOS, in my opinion. We mentioned I mentioned earlier the Hunt for Red October, the Crazy Ivan. I don't think that was ever referenced in TNG in Star Trek before.
No, I thought the same thing because I was like, wait, I even wrote them a note. So like Crazy Ivan. I'm like, okay, Hunt for October.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I tried to like go back and be like, hey, is that like a reference or something in Star Trek? But I'm like, I don't
think it is. But the funny thing is, the Hunt for Red October was mentioned as very Star Trek related. Like it had a lot of similarities to the Wrath of Khan. Yeah. I mentioned the fan dance. We see covert ops outfits like we see in, for example, Chain of Command. So that's similar, and we saw them actually last episode. I got a kick out of who I hate, Remans, and that's that was great because a lot of people hated the Remans from Star Trek Nemesis. So yeah. I thought that was fantastic.
I just love the fact that it was like it's like our first like scene of them, and that's what they and it was just funny because he's like, oh yeah, you know what I hate? Oh yeah, the Remans. And it was just like it sounded hilarious just the way they even said it. So I was like, I don't know. I thought it was hilarious. It was such a good quip.
Yeah. We mentioned the salt vampires from the Man Trap. Dr. Tana has like a kind of a similar thing from Crusher and her episode Remember Me. It was also similar to like Future Imperfect, I thought, a little bit, or Parallels. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah. It was I think Lieutenant Shax mentions the denobulan flesh-eating bacteria, and of course that's a reference to Dr. Phlox and the denobulans, which supposedly were around, at the beginning of the Federation, but we didn't really see them until to Enterprise. So, send them a message is actually something Khan said in the Wrath of Khan. Vulcan nerve pinch that Rutherford did. Now, I didn't catch this, but this was mentioned on an article from Den of Geek, so I'll give them credit for this. And some of the rest of the things that I've got here were taken right from that article. In the museum, apparently, there were the following: a Jem'Hadar fighter, which of course was from Deep Space Nine, a Ferengi shuttle, which we see in TNG and DS9, a Klingon D7 or Katinga class Klingon battlecruiser, which we see from various going from TOS all the way up. So, including Discovery. Several Federation shuttlecraft, mostly the TNG era, a classic TOS shuttlecraft, a Vulcan landing ship from First Contact, a Tholian ship from the Tholian Web, and In a Mirror Darkly, and something that looks like the monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey. So that's funny.
No, I actually saw this too, and I was like, I went back and like as I was rewatching the episode, and I kept trying to like stop it because CBS All Access on the web sucks. I was like trying to like stop it so that I could see that, and I saw some of those too. But I'm like, I did not see the monolith. But I'm like,
yeah, they really need to put in their speed,
like something that like lets it.
Yeah,
you can pause it without it disappearing.
Well, and there's also and what it also does is when you pause it, it shrinks into
right.
Yeah, that's not good. But also, they need to have a speed setting so that you can watch things in slow motion or frame by frame.
Or
yeah.
or like be able to like pause it and
Yeah.
then like go back frames, but-
Especially slow motion.
yeah.
Chief Engineer Billups. And I caught this and I didn't put it in my notes, but it was mentioned in Den of Geek. So I'll give them partial credit for this because I did see this, but I didn't have it in my notes. He makes two references to TNG that I thought were like, okay, was he on the Enterprise? Because he mentions Mark Twain's got a gun. And this is when he was like, having oxygen, whatever they call it, when Rutherford saves him. So he says, Mark Twain's got a gun. And then he says, Tasha, no, the garbage bag's behind you. And of course, that's referring to two things, of course. Time's Arrow from the season 5 season finale, which, so season 5, season 6 premiere. And then, of course, the episode when Tasha Yar dies from season 1, Skin of Evil. So,
yeah.
let's see. Romulan TNG bridge. I guess the look and feel was like a TNG bridge. Mariner mentions, like, whenever Q shows up, and Boimler mentions 3 references. He mentions, did Picard know about the Borg? And of course, that's referring to Q Who, which we see Q later. Then he mentions, did Kirk know about that giant Spock on Phylos? And that is referring to The Infinite Vulcan, which is an animated series episode where there is a giant Spock that is a huge clone called Spock 2. So it's also kind of referenced in when Lieutenant Shax mentions Spock and Spock.
Yeah, Spock and Spock. That's what.
Yeah. And then, of course, he also mentions, did Dr. Crusher know about that ghost in the lantern from the Scottish planet that you hooked up with that one time? And this is, of course, from the very terrible episode, one of my least favorite episodes, Sub Rosa. I hate that episode.
I know, but it's like, when Boimler said that, I was like, okay, that seems very familiar. And I'm like, why is that familiar?
It's like, probably because you blocked it out of your mind.
Yeah. But then I went back, obviously, because we're doing the show or whatever. I was just like, okay. I'm like, I got to look it up. And I saw all the other stuff and this, and that. I'm like, and then I like found the episode and like kind of did a little, like just put it on. Like, oh gosh, that's right. I remember that. And I actually start remembering, like, I kind of remember watching that and being like, what is going on? To me, it was like that was hilarious. That's one reference that you're going to pull out of everything that has anything to do with Dr. Crusher.
Well, it's kind of funny because I think this is arguable, okay? But I would say in the last 2 episodes, we see them reference the worst episode of Voyager, in my opinion, Threshold.
Yeah. Well,
and the worst episode, or certainly one of like the top 5 worst episodes of TNG, Sub Rosa. So anyway, we also get the drumhead. He says drumhead. And of course, that's reference to the fantastic episode, putting it to the other extreme. And I think an episode that I thought was really good when it aired in 1991, and as time has gone on, it has become one of the top episodes in TNG, the drumhead. I love that episode. And I even sometimes play this.
I brought down bigger men than you, Picard.
That's from that episode.
Nice.
That's the last thing that Admiral Sati says before she is kind of taken away. And the last thing is when Q kind of confronts Mariner and the rest of the lower decks crew. He says, I am going to challenge you to a duel. And that is referencing Trelane from TOS because he said that. So it has been suggested that Trelane was actually part of the Q continuum, but that was never proven or disproven. So this doesn't prove it, but it's kind of like a sneaky reference. Okay, so that's it for our lengthy references section. Now we have other notes. So do you have any other notes?
No, I mean, I enjoyed it all. I think we covered a lot of the same things that I wanted to talk about. So
yeah, just a couple little tiny things. Ketuvon Prime, and then we see a couple other places where we see like Romulus, capital of the Romulan Star Empire and things like that. I wish the TNG and the other Star Trek shows of the 90s did that kind of thing where it had an establishing shot with the, where they were, because they didn't really do that back then. Yet I think these days, like Discovery and Picard especially did this a lot, where especially Picard put these titles down when they would show, where they were. So that I wish that, thinking about it, I wish TNG, DS9, and Voyager did the same thing. And I really want to know what evasive maneuvers 84 and 88 are.
I know. I was like, why? Because their reaction was like, "What are you? Are you kidding me?" And then it wasn't until he said "crazy Ivan" that they were like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
So it was like, these are like, what was it? Like you were just making something up, and then you were like, "I'm just gonna go with this," and then even Mariner was like, "Are you freaking crazy?"
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I need to know more.
Yeah. Two final things. I caught that Sam Rutherford's first name in long form is a version of Sam I've never heard of before. It's not Samuel, it's Samanthan. So it's like Samantha, but it's got an N at the end. So I thought that was interesting. And lastly, this could have been in the nose or the not good enoughs. Mariner's mouth. Like, she said some things to some superior officers that, like, even the captain, calling her Captain Clarity. Like, how does she get away with that? So I think they're kind of stretching this as far as they possibly can. And I have to think at some point, if she doesn't stop this, she's going to get herself kicked out of Starfleet completely. So I think that if she does any more of this, like telling the chief engineer to shut up, I don't think that was appropriate. And, saying Captain Clarity or whatever, again, that's more of a petulant child than a Starfleet ensign, to me. And she gets away with it because she's a petulant child of Captain Freeman, whereas maybe the rest of the crew that don't know that she is her daughter would be looking like, how come she gets away with that, But anyway, that's all I have to say about that. Let's now move on to our shipwide announcements. Just a couple little things that I wanted to mention. Of course, we had John Delancey in this, which we know, and Kurtwood Smith. We also had Kenneth Mitchell. And of course, Kenneth Mitchell was the guy who played the triumvirate of Klingons on Star Trek Discovery. He played Cole, and then Cole Shah, his father, and then later Tenavik. And, he was really good as Klingon, and supposedly he's going to be back playing a human in Discovery, but he actually had voiced 3 roles in this episode. So he played the bug captain, or we're assuming they're bug insects, but Captain Sirtave. I don't know where that comes from, but that's what denofgeek.com mentions. And apparently he also plays a Federation guard and a Romulan guard in this, although I'm not really sure that it was a Romulan guard. I thought it was a Vulcan guard. But anyway, so the character that I was saying was a little too human-like. Maybe he was Romulan. I don't know. He could have been, because it was kind of a Romulan thing he had on his head, similar to the TOS. So I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that initial thing I brought up. So a couple little news items. Mark Hamill and Sir Patrick Stewart. There's been a series of, I think they're just web commercials. I don't know. Maybe I haven't really watched anything on TV this week, just on the web. But there are a series of commercials for Uber Eats where they kind of confront each other, and they're like saying that they're going to do a showdown, but first they're going to eat. And anyway, it's funny. Explaining it doesn't really do it justice. but they're really funny. So I've seen 3 of them. I don't know if there are any more. There are probably going to be more that they'll release, but I don't know. Have you had a chance to see them?
No, I have not. I saw something on Twitter or whatever, but I didn't get to actually see the video.
The funny thing was, I got a direct message from Uber Eats saying, "Hey, we think you would like this." And
really?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I guess they knew that I, did podcasts on Star Trek, and they sent it directly to me to watch, and it was actually sent out ahead of when everybody else got to see it. And I didn't actually pick up the message until after it had been released, so I didn't. But I actually got it before everyone else. So shame on me.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's that. And next story is that Jonathan Frakes at a GalaxyCon virtual panel last weekend said that he pitched John Delancey's Q for both First Contact and Insurrection, and was, quote unquote, surprised it didn't happen. Now, I don't have any context beyond this. This was one of the stories. Well, actually, all the stories this week were collected by Wes Huntington, so Wes from Minnesota. So I didn't get a chance to read the story, so I don't know if they were pitched as part of the story of First Contact and Insurrection, or if they were the story. I don't know, but anyway.
Yeah.
So, but I could have definitely seen him being there, and for that matter, I could see him showing up on Picard, and I was actually surprised he didn't show up on Picard when Picard changed into what Picard changed into, which I won't say in case some people haven't seen it. So, last, the Emmy Awards in memoriam video that they always do honors people that have died over the last year within the TV industry. And the video honored 2 people from the Star Trek history. Of course, most notably, star of Deep Space Nine. And he also was he guest appeared in Enterprise as a different character, and was Colonel West in Star Trek VI. Rene Auberjonois, of course, Odo. And of course, if you don't know, the story that I sold to DS9, or premise that I sold to DS9, was an Odo story. So his character, very near and dear to my heart. So he was mentioned, and of course, he had a long history of roles. So you could certainly see, in addition to Deep Space Nine, he was played, I don't remember the character's name, but he was had a big supporting role in Benson, and also was in Boston Legal, so with William Shatner, actually. So so I'm not surprised that he was in it. And we, of course, can't forget writer DC Fontana, who played such a pivotal role in Star Trek, the original series, and was effectively the showrunner for the animated series, and was involved in the first season of The Next Generation, including co-writing the Encounter in Farpoint. So, she played a big role in Star Trek. But one that was notably absent from the in memoriam section was Aaron Eisenberg, who, of course, played Nog on DS9. So they always end up missing somebody on those in memoriams. So
No, and I would have to say though, it's like Renee was obviously I like Deep Space Nine was always a big, huge one of my many of things that I love about Star Trek, and I watched it from beginning to end. But Renee had a lot of he had a lot of influence with other directors, other movie makers, and this and that. And actually, it's he had a Kickstarter for a movie called The Blood Stripes, and I donated. They had a Kickstarter, and I donated to that, and I got a signed picture of him and Nana Visitor, but as Odo and Kira, and that was one of the things that they did. So it's just before his passing, it's he was involved in so many projects and this and that, and it's that might be that's a thing that you should probably check out or whatever. It's it was just my very, very one little instinct that are in take that I could have one moment that I wanted to hey, I'm I'm never going to actually meet you in person or do anything like that. But it's I got a response from him on Twitter, direct message about hey, what's your address? I'm thank you for donating and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And it's Renee, I don't know. I just
very cool.
One of my favorite, it's one of my favorite things that I've ever done or gotten, collected as a fan. I'm not one of those people that are just oh, I'm just going to go to every league con and get a signature and this and that. I was just I'm more a little passe. I'm hey, whatever. I'm I just want to make it important. And I was just it's he did a lot of work before he passed away. He's not just Odo. He did a lot of work. And I'm I pretty much just keep looking, just search and Google search it. He's amazing.
All right. So that's it for our news. And let's start to wrap it up. So Kyle, tell the good people how to contact us.
All right. To submit your theories or feedback, go to talkthroughmedia.com/feedback, where you can submit text or audio. You can also call 216-232-6146. You can also email us at lowerdecks@talkthroughmedia.com. Post in our designated episode thread in our Facebook group, and that's at facebook.com/groups/Star Trek TTM podcast. The deadline for season 1, episode 9 will be on a regular day and time, Friday, October 2nd, 2020 at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central. To support us, you can support us at Twitter. We're at Star Trek TTM. A great way to support us is to share us on Twitter and Facebook. You can also find us at facebook.com/talkthroughmedia, our network page, and there you can actually write us a review. Share us on Facebook and retweet us on Twitter, especially when you post that the new episode is out. That's a great way to support us, get the word out. And also subscribe to us in Apple Podcasts or on your podcast client of choice. And while you're there, give us a rating or review.
And another good way to support us, and some would call the best way. Actually, I don't mean to make, it helps us to pay for hosting and the various things that we need to produce the podcast is through Patreon. And as far as Patreon, probably by the time you will have heard this, the episode will have already been recorded, but we are doing we weren't sure when it was going to be as of last episode, but we are recording a Patreon episode Sunday, September 27th, at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, and I believe that is 6 p.m. UTC time. And so if I happen to get this all edited and out the door and possibly maybe to YouTube, which I'll talk about in a minute. If you hear this, then it's a Patreon episode, but if you have the URL and the code and the password to get in, you can join the Zoom meeting. So we're not like restricting who can attend it, but we are kind of limiting who gets the audio this time because we are in Lower Decks episodes. You're getting content from us, so we're not going to publish this one to the regular feed like we have the last several. But anyway, if you attend, we will make sure you get to listen to it. And all patrons will get a chance to listen to it, of course. But we would like to thank our Patreon supporters, Clint McCollum, Lawrence Todd, James Robbins, Fred Petrie, the guy over there, Comic Adams, Kim Vogley, Brian Shiro, Christoph Leckleitner, Lee Radke, Aaron Mays, Michael Carrier, Stephen Chambers, Kevin Lyle, and Jeff Gentry. And one thing I don't know why we didn't have it in here, but all of our new episodes, everything that we have been publishing going forward, we started this sometime last year. Everything we publish goes first to YouTube. So if you want to catch us maybe anywhere from like 2 to even 24 hours ahead of everyone else, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just search for Talk Through Media and subscribe to our channel, and you will get notifications of our new episodes and be able to listen to them before everyone else. So wanted to mention that. And I mentioned it early on in the episode, but I'll mention it one more time. If you listen to us on the Star Trek Picard cast feed and you plan to watch Star Trek Discovery, subscribe to the Star Trek Discovery podcast feed so you can listen to the Star Trek Discovery podcast feed when it starts up in a couple of weeks. So that is important because we're not going to have it on the Picard feed. We never have, and we won't. And everything we do, the Picard, the Lower Decks, the Discovery, the Rebinged DS9 podcast that Kim and James do, the Walking Dead Talk Through, which we finally got our episode out that we kept on talking about that we were going to record. We finally released that. And that's where we basically, I'll mention it here, we are looking for a new co-host to join Kyle and sometimes me because Mark, who was the other co-host on the show, has left the network. So if you're interested, please drop us a line like through the feedback form or, send us a direct message, whatever. But that's for the Walking Dead talk through side of things, but I wanted to mention it here. And so we finally got that episode out. And then the other podcast, if we ever get back to it, that's also on that all-inclusive feed is Let's Talk Through. The next episode, Season 1, Episode 9, is titled Crisis Point. And I just got that from Memory Alpha. We don't know who's written it or directed it. And according to Memory Alpha, what it says is Mariner repurposes Boimler's holodeck program to cast herself as the villain in a Lower Deck style movie. Interesting.
Yeah.
So, until next time, I'm Brian.
And I'm Kyle.
Peace and long life.
Live long and prosper.